Hello and welcome to your 10th R tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to give you some information on how to slice and extract information from data frames. I'm going to split this up into two videos because there's a lot of ground to cover and I'll cover the rest of this topic in a second video. But let me just go ahead and dive right in and show you the information that I want to show you in this video. Before I can get too far though, I'll have to explain a little bit on the data set that I'm going to use for these examples. It's a data set that is already preloaded in the R called mtcars. There is documentation on this data set, so I'm going to pull up that documentation and recall to pull up documentation. All I need to do is type question mark and the name of the item that I want to get documentation on. So I do question mark mtcars, enter. And on the lower right hand side we can see the R documentation pop up. I won't dive too much into what this is. You can read that on your own if you want to. But just really what I want to show you is that there's this data set called mtcars. It's already loaded in the R. And the short answer on why it exists is it's used mostly to allow you to test snippets of code either on your own, or if you wanted to include something in documentation, or if somebody else included something in documentation and you wanted to test it out in the console. That's what this data set is here for. It's basically something already loaded in the R that will allow you to test pieces of code on. Okay. You might be a little bit confused on why it doesn't show up in the Workspace tab. The short answer for that is there's a lot of preloaded data sets within R. They don't show up in the Workspace tab because it would be too cluttered, too much information. This is just one of those special data sets that just isn't going to show up in the Workspace tab. But I'm going to use it for these examples. You can read a little bit more about what mtcars is on your own if you choose to. Let me go ahead and show you some of the functions that I wanted to show you. And these functions that I'm going to show you, they're really great for getting a little bit better understanding on what your data set is. A lot of times you'll load your data set and you won't necessarily have the best idea on what the structure of the data is or whether you imported it correctly, things of that nature. And these functions are very useful at getting an idea on what your data set looks like. The first function I'm going to show you is something called the head function, HEAD. I'll type it, and the argument that goes in here is the name of your data set. And recall the data set I'm going to use is mtcars. mtcars. I'll send it. And what the head function does is it only returns the first 6 observations of your data set and ignores the rest. The reason that this is very useful is, let's say you had a data set with hundreds or thousands or even millions of observations. Rarely do you want to print out every single observation. The head function is great for just giving you enough rows just so that you can get a really high-level idea on what the structure of the data frame is without printing out every single observation. So that's what's great about that function. Related to the head function is the tail function. And this is almost identical. The difference between head and tail is the tail function will print out the last 6 observations, unlike the head function which prints out the first 6 observations. You might find yourself in a situation where you want to print out the first 3 observations but not necessarily 6 observations. Let's say you wanted to print out 10 observations. The head function can do that as well. All you need to do is include an optional second argument. That second argument is how many observations you want to include. So if we wanted to print out 10 observations, I just include 10 as the optional second argument, send it to the console, and we can see 10 rows of our mtcars data down there. Another useful function is called the str function, which essentially stands for structure. If I want to get a better idea on what the structure of the data frame is, that's what I use this function for. So I'll type str mtcars, send it to the console, and this tells us a few things. We can see the first line there. It tells us that the the argument that we input into the structure function was a data frame. It tells us there were 32 observations along with 11 variables. Furthermore, it tells us it gives us a sample of the first few observations of each of these variables, and it also tells us the type of variable that it is. If you look in that, it's not quite, but it looks like a second column there where it says NUM for each of the variables. What that's telling us is it's telling us the type of variable that the type of data associated with that variable. For example, the MPG variable, that it would be a numeric type variable. Now in this data set, they're all numeric type variables, but you might have, for example, a integer type variable. You might have a logical type variable, and what I mean by logical is it's either true or false. You could have a character type variable where somebody actually types in a name, something like that. And there are a few others that I won't cover now, but basically the structure function gives you information on types of variables. It tells you, and it gives you some other information as well. So structure function is another good function if you want to get an idea on a little bit better idea on what your data set actually is. The last one I'm going to show you in this video is something called the summary function. I'll go ahead and type it, send it to the console, and talk a little bit about it. mtcars, command enter. Now, I didn't see all the output, so what I'm going to do is something you can do in RStudio is you can blow up the console if you feel like you need to. I'm going to click the upper right hand corner of the console here, and what that's going to do is it's going to blow it up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to read, and we can get a better idea on what this summary function did. What it did is it took every single variable in my data set, and it gave me a really high level statistical summary on on that variable. So I'll use MPG, miles per gallon, as an example. We can see that going from top to bottom, it gave us the minimum value. It gave us the first quartile. It gave us the median, mean, third quartile, and max. And it would do that for any type of numeric variable. For different variable types, you're going to have a different type of summary. But basically, summary is a good way. The summary function is a good way to get an idea on a really high level idea on the shape and the distribution of all the variables in your data set. I'm going to leave it for there. I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'll show you some other ways to extract and pull out information from your data sets later, and I hope to see you guys next time.